Chapter 449, Remains 5. The Spectre understood the meaning of those words. Molen was right. The Spectre didn't know Molen. He knew the name and the appearance. Molen existed in his memory, but the memories did not belong to the Spectre. The person named Molen Roar, whom the Spectre knew, was based on Hamel's memories. Molen Roar existed only in Hamel's memories. On the other hand, Molen standing before him now existed in reality, not just in his memory. This man before him did not act foolishly like Molen from the memories. He didn't burst into hearty laughter, nor did he show unconditional trust and friendship. Instead of laughter, this man had anger. Hatred, not trust. Murderous intent, not friendship. To the Spectre, Molen was not Molen as he had thought of based on the memories, just as the Spectre wasn't Hamel to Molen. But that was also precisely why Molen was Molen. Molen was exactly as the Spectre had imagined he would be. He had not doubted for a single moment that Molen would act this way after knowing the truth and facing him. Even Hamel would have reacted the same way if he had faced Molen's death knight after hundreds of years. Therefore, Molen would never accept the Spectre, nor would he consider listening to the Spectre's circumstances. There was no reason for Molen to do so. Even so, the Spectre thought with a bitter smile, if I begged, you would stop to listen even just for a moment. Despite Molen's intense anger, if the Spectre fell to his knees and begged, he knew Molen would pause his attack momentarily. If the Spectre spoke of his situation, acknowledged he was a fake, and explained that he was allowed to exist by vermouth, Molen would hesitate and ponder. That was the kind of man Molen was. Should I do that? The Spectre wondered momentarily. But the Spectre wasn't Hamel. He could not become Hamel. Obsessing over this verification now seemed ridiculous. What the Spectre sought was what he could do, what he should do. The Spectre couldn't fight the Demon King of Incarceration or the Demon King of Destruction. So should he fight against more Giabella? Was the purpose of his existence to aid Hamel in battle against Giabella and other demons? Was that what Vermouth had intended him to do? Was that all? Did he exist just to fight trivial demons? What could he do for the world? What should he do? Spectre Molen called out. With just the grasp of an axe, everything about Molen changed. The Spectre felt a powerful aura emanating from Molen as he stared at the Spectre. You are not Hamel, he said. It was an obvious, undeniable statement. I don't know if you came here to deceive or mock me, continued Molen. There was immense power focused on the axe. Dark power stirred around the Spectre in response. He knew he couldn't simply allow himself to be struck by the axe. But Spectre, if you come to me with Hamel's face, speaking with Hamel's voice, claiming to know me, then as Hamel's friend, I have no choice but to be enraged, said Molen. The Spectre just chuckled at those words. It was typical of Molen. This laughter made Molen hesitate for a moment. Hamel had told him of the Death Knight. The Spectre was a Death Knight made from Hamel's buried corpse from the desert tomb. He was created with all of the memories extracted from Hamel's body and formed into a conscious being. Some of his memories had been manipulated for easier control. He thinks he died betrayed by everyone rather than dying after throwing himself for vermouth, Molen recalled. Therefore, the Death Knight despised the world and everything that was associated with his past comrades. If so, Molen could understand why this ghastly Spectre came here alone. He should have come to kill me, Molen realized. He was betrayed by his comrades and killed? Although it was a lie not worth believing, a being born from lies would naturally be swayed by such a lie. In fact, Hamel had heard from the Spectre of its hatred and contempt for his old comrades, as well as its murderous intent towards the entire Lionheart lineage. If this Spectre, resembling Hamel, came to know that Molen Roar was alive, he would naturally come for revenge, especially if his ego actually resembled Hamel's. It was almost expected that the Spectre would show up. But to show up without displaying any killing intent was also like Hamel. While Hamel could be angry with the descendants of Vermouth, even if he was filled with hatred and the desire to kill, Hamel would hesitate when he actually faced his comrades. Hamel would first ask for reasons for the betrayal before drawing his sword and attacking. There was a sense of dissonance. Molen grappled with how to interpret this dissonance. It was like Hamel not to attack immediately, but the silence was unusual. Molen didn't want to confront it, so he revealed the truth straight away. You are not Hamel. Even after hearing those words, the Spectre didn't react defensively. Instead, it wore a wistful smile. Could it be? Molen said, realizing the truth. The power filling the axe dissipated slightly. The oppressive presence around Molen lightened somewhat, and surprise flickered in his eyes, which were previously filled only with rage, hatred, and murderous intent. Realized it? The specter said, sounding displeased. The specter disliked it. Molen's action wasn't deliberate. It was honest and instinctual. It was as if he had acted without thinking. But the specter didn't want Molen to recognize the truth. He didn't want to give Molen the time to deliberate on the truth he grasped. He didn't want to be judged or understood in pity. The idea of Molen's hatred and murderous intent morphing into sympathy was intolerable. Yes. He didn't want pity or understanding. The specter instinctively leaped into action and rapidly closed the distance between him and Molen. Molen felt the specter's unleashed dark power, which shocked him. Why did I only realize it now? Molen thought in shock. Until this moment he hadn't sensed any dark power from the specter. He had been solely engrossed in the specter's appearance, which resembled Hamel. But now the specter was unleashing enormous amounts of dark power. It left Molen horrified. Moreover, the nature of the ominous dark power was you. Molen's confusion and hesitation vanished. The specter was emitting the ominous dark power of destruction. He was more powerful than any Nur Molen had slain over hundreds of years. It threatened to unhinge and destroy his sanity. Despite being called a fake, the specter didn't react. Perhaps that was when it understood its true identity. That realization had made Molen hesitate briefly. But now, Molen no longer hesitated as the specter unleashed its dark power and attacked. This entity should not exist. That was how Molen chose to define the specter. The specter's mere existence threatened to ruin the world, especially here in Lahanjar, which was close to the end Vermouth had warned about. Boom. Molen's axe clashed with the specter's sword. Despite only exchanging a single blow, Molen was immediately struck with a fundamental emotion. It was something he had long forgotten, an emotion that humans instinctively possessed. Disgust. What he felt was the same emotion a human might have when faced with many-legged insects, squirming rats, or rotting corpses. He felt a similar emotion of disgust. But more than the impact of the clash, he felt disgust at the overwhelming power that the specter possessed. It made his skin crawl. Then another emotion also started to creep into his heart. It was fear. Molen gritted his teeth. That dark power was qualitatively different from the Nur's. Even after only a single exchange, it reminded him of the demon king of destruction from 300 years ago. Ugh. A groan slipped through Molen's clenched teeth. The specter's black sword matched Molen's axe in the direct power struggle, and the endless outpour of dark power repelled Molen's mana. He dares. Crack. The axe finally shattered the black sword. Just as it seemed like Molen was about to cleave the specter leaped back. Instead of continuing his assault, Molen stamped his foot. Boom. An explosion erupted around him. Molen gripped his axe with both hands, concentrating the dispersed power into it. The specter also raised his hands while standing high in the sky. He wielded a pair of swords too large for one hand. The specter was the first to launch his attacks as he fell a dizzying barrage of strikes. Even for Molen, it was impossible to read and counter every blow. However, Molen never intended to counter each strike. Amid the chaotic flurry, his axe split through the center. Boom. Dark power and mana mixed together, and Molen swallowed hard as he thought, even if it's a fake. Just one split didn't end the flurry. Continuous sword strikes pressed him from all sides. This sword dance was more advanced than what Molen remembered of Hamel. It also resembled Eugenie's current attacks. That fact made Molen uncomfortable. Molen had trained against Eugene several times each day for the last 6 months. As such, he realized he was rather well-versed in the specter's attacks. It was familiar. That very fact sent chills down Molen's spine. The specter's sword was no different from Eugene's. If anything, it represented a different endpoint that had begun from Hamel. So which was superior? The answer was clear. Eugene's swordsmanship. It had to be. The swordsmanship Eugene displayed before his departure was a culmination of various elements. It wasn't something that was purely Hamel's, but rather a form of swordsmanship enriched by the experiences of war god Ogoroth, experiences of Eugene Lionheart after his reincarnation, as well as countless life and death battles with Molen. The specter's sword couldn't match Eugene's, but it was tenacious. His techniques were forged in hatred and murderous intent to kill the opponent at any cost, even if it meant self-destruction. Molen didn't want to think this way, but the specter's swordsmanship was reminiscent of Hamel. If Hamel had dedicated himself wholly and intensely to the sword, it might have taken a form like this. If Molen hadn't met Eugene, hadn't known he was the reincarnation of Hamel, and even if he knew that this specter was fake, I might have wavered, Molen admitted. The sword forged in murderous intent was relentless and persistent. In a brief span, Molen smashed apart thousands of strikes. But he couldn't deal a fatal blow. It seemed there was no such thing as a fatal blow against this entity. Molen didn't feel inferior when it came to power, but simply clashing and exchanging attacks with the specter seemed to chip away at him. No, it was truly causing his being to erode away. It was similar to how the century-long battles with the Nur had worn on his spirit. Every moment he faced the specter had a similar effect. Fake, Molen spat with seething anger. To think that just confronting it caused corruption and madness. Even so, Molen wouldn't retreat. He knew he wasn't alone. If he were to go mad from the specter, to wander in a barrier alone, tear at Nur's corpses, and bash his head into the ground, unable to die, Eugene, Sienna, and Anise would surely do something about it. But even without that belief, Molen wouldn't step back. He would have long abandoned Vermouth's request if he feared going mad. Fake, the specter thought. How many times had he heard that? He never became accustomed to it. Each time it felt like his heart was being carved out. The specter didn't respond and instead just moved his sword. Molen was indeed Molen. His strength and axe were incomparably stronger than the specter remembered. If they had met right after the specter became an undead, the fight wouldn't even have been viable. How ironic, the specter chuckled inwardly. He had once raged about meeting Molen for revenge despite the disparity that would have existed between them in the past. The specter swallowed a bitter smile and twisted his body to dodge a blow. Although the axe had narrowly missed him, it still tore away at his existence. Would dying by your hand bring peace? He contemplated. Suddenly Molen's axe stopped. The specter's sword simultaneously ceased. They hadn't completely lowered their weapons, but both the specter and Molen stopped their attacks and stared at each other. You are a fake. You are not Hamel, said Molen. The specter didn't say anything. But Molen decided to acknowledge what he felt at the moment. Your sword is like Hamel's. What? The specter responded, surprised. I don't care how you take this. You've insulted me and my friend by coming before me. Molen sighed while shaking his head. But I, Molen Roar, am a warrior. Your sword is honed in desperation and I can feel it. Although it was brief, I felt it when I battled against you. What was he saying? The specter's eyes quivered in turmoil. Unperturbed by the disturbance, Molen continued, I do not know what you came here for. I do not want to hear it either. However, I am a warrior, so I want to acknowledge this. Molen lowered his axe for a brief moment. I, Molen Roar, recognize you as a warrior, he declared. Whether the opponent was Hamel, a fake human or monster, it didn't matter. If one held a weapon, trained, pursued, and stood in battle, they were a warrior in Molen's eyes. The specter was a warrior in Molen's eyes. The specter couldn't help but laugh. Such a statement was so typical of Molen. No one else in his place would have said the same thing at this moment. Do you want to kill me? The specter asked. He thought the answer was obvious. Yes. Molen's response was straightforward and simple. He had the right to kill the specter. As he said earlier, the specter had insulted Molen just by being here. As Hamel's friend, he had every right to end the specter. The specter might have thought dying by Molen's hand wouldn't be so bad just moments ago. But now things were different. He had found a glimpse of the answer to the questions he had sought, the questions about who he was, what he could do and what he should do. Molen, the brave Molen, had recognized the specter as a warrior. No, said the specter. Molen set aside his personal anger and other emotions. He acknowledged and faced the specter. The specter knew he was a fake, yet he had wanted to avoid the truth. He had been tied to his mistaken obsessions. He had thought it was okay to die by Molen's hand. The specter had ignored that his obstinacy not only led to his own death but also sickened Molen. Look around. Though the battle was short, much had changed since the beginning. All the snow in the area had evaporated. No more snow fell from the sky. Rather, the once hazy sky filled with snow clouds had now turned gray with something else. Blood. The specter also noticed the blood he had spilled. Naturally, he hadn't been conscious of it, but the area around them was drenched in blood. He had spilled blood each time he was grazed or torn apart by Molin's axe. He had not paid attention to it in his battle against the Demon King of Incarceration. It had not been necessary. However, it was different here. His blood didn't disappear. Even if he could recollect the blood, the sinister essence that had seeped into the ground remained. The specter looked at Molin. His robust body could be seen sporting wounds. Not just simple wounds either, but cuts and contamination from the blade of dark power. In just a short time, Molin's breathing had become rough and shadows flickered in his eyes. "I can't die by your hand," said the specter. He couldn't die, especially not here. The specter turned his head and looked at the distant mountain peaks. Beyond them lay Roguyarin. "It was good meeting you," the specter said in parting. Before Molin could respond, the specter dropped his sword and closed his eyes. When he reopened them, he looked up at the sky. Floating stations in the high sky caught his gaze. Chapter 450, Remains 6. "Damn wench!" shouted Sienna while striding back into the room. Her exclamation made everyone shrink back in their seats. Despite each of them being archwizards powerful enough to shake kingdoms, their authority meant nothing in this sacred space. They were in the topmost chamber of the Royal Library Akron in Sienna's hall. The wise Sienna was the greatest and most powerful wizard in history. She aspired to become the goddess of magic, and being an 8th circle archwizard in her domain was common and expected. Even so, for someone aiming to become the goddess of magic to use such coarse language, one of the wizards thought. They knew whom Sienna had been talking with, Eugene Lionheart. He was her direct disciple, a young man of 23 who was already on the cusp of becoming an archwizard. No, in fact, it could be said that he had already crossed the threshold of being an archwizard. To boot, he was the hero. Any of the archwizards present would have been proud to call such a talented and accomplished youngster their student. In fact, they would have shown even more love and attention than they would to even their own flesh and blood. As such, Sienna's attachment to her student wasn't unusual, though some thought it a bit excessive. But no one dared to voice such opinions out loud. "What displeases you?" asked Balzac Ludbeth, the Black Tower Master. He was the first to break the silence while the other wizards simply gauged the atmosphere. He was a black wizard yet had gained Sienna's recognition as a wizard. He was the only wizard permitted to join her in the hall just for unimportant discussions. Thanks to this somewhat vague privilege, Balzac was always busy. Whenever the discussions turned toward the topic of Sienna's new signature, Balzac would be in a different hall a few floors below. When it was time for casual conversation and exchange among wizards, he would hurry up to Sienna's hall. There was no need for him to participate. However, no wizard worth their salt would miss such an opportunity. Who would give up on the chance to talk about magic with the wise Sienna just because of the inconvenience of moving between floors? If anyone did, they wouldn't deserve to be called a wizard. "I was talking with my lovely disciple, and some crazy woman interfered and cut off our conversation," Sienna complained while plopping down in the main seat. While the other wizards pondered what response to give, the ever-opportunist Balzac chimed in. "More Giabella. Her madness is well known even in Helmuth. They're just too afraid of her authority as a duke in power to speak openly." "Right," Sienna agreed. "Yes, Lady Sienna. By the way, did you know? There is a massive screen in Babel located in the capital, Pandemonium. Duke Giabella used her status as Helmuth's highest taxpayer to pressure Duke Gavid and secured a monthly advertisement spot on the screen," said Balzac. "What a crazy!" Sienna exclaimed. "Ah, exactly, what insanity. When I was studying in Helmuth, it really pained me to see the advertisement on that screen." "When was it?" "There was a time when Duke Giabella appeared in a vulgar swimsuit," he continued. Balzac and Noir weren't enemies. Instead, Balzac had long received patronage from Noir. But what did that matter now? He wouldn't have spoken so freely if Giabella herself had been present or if there had been any risk of the conversation being leaked. Even though the chances of their conversation leaking were minimal, there was always a tiny possibility. After a lengthy session of mocking Giabella, Balzac added a disclaimer after checking that Sienna was giving a huge smile. "This stays a secret from Duke Giabella, Lady Sienna." "Huh. Don't worry about that, Balzac. Would I do something to cause you trouble?" Sienna replied with a bright smile, to which Balzac bowed gratefully. He was perhaps the only black wizard in 300 years to receive such treatment from Sienna. Although he was skilled at buttering her up, His ability to stay in her good graces was more due to his knack for not overstepping boundaries. He never forgot that he was a black wizard. He was never greedy for more than what he was permitted. He knew that he was balancing himself on a thin rope. Balzac turned his head when he felt a piercing gaze. Melkith El-Haya was gnawing at her nails, her eyes burning with jealousy. Though she was the only one. The other archwizards harbored no such feelings for Balzac. Her flawed, horrible personality seemed to make her burn exclusively with envy. Lovelian interrupted the silence with a thoughtful hum while deeply contemplating Sienna's newly conceived magical formula. While improving the formula seemed impossible, he believed his unique perspective as a wizard walking a different path could still add value. After adding a few notes and symbols to the formula, he glanced outside. The day has already turned to evening. Shall we conclude for today? He suggested. They often debated until dawn, but on quiet days like this, they usually wrapped up their meetings around dusk. Yeah, Sienna replied while glancing out the window. Melkith immediately seized the opportunity to approach her. Sis, let's have dinner together, you and me. Melkith pleaded. Why would I eat with you? Sienna retorted dismissively. Why don't you want to eat just the two of us? Then I'll call her. Her name was? Melkith attempted to include another wizard, one who was supposed to have come from nowhere in the countryside. She appeared unkempt and reclusive, and her hair was completely overgrown. What was her name? Reincarnted Bors. The wizard introduced herself, looking slightly uncomfortable under Melkith's enthusiastic gaze. Melkith eagerly tugged on Sienna's arm upon hearing the name. That's right. Reincarnted. Sis, you, me and Reincarnted. We three can eat together. What about it? Asked Melkith. Why should I dine with you and Reincarnted? Sienna questioned again. We all share the same gender, right? We can talk about things you can't talk about with the musty old male wizards here. Don't you have an interest in such things, sis? Melkith continued to press her, undeterred. Musty old men? Wasn't she going too far? This remark made Jen Eric and Tremple uncomfortably sniff themselves. I'm not interested, was Sienna's response. He was lying. He was slightly interested. She was slightly curious about such fresh conversations, considering she had devoted the entirety of her past life to battling demons, and her life afterward had been consumed by magic. For Sienna, having the company of other women to talk and empathize about such matters seemed rather valuable. However, it mattered who she would be talking to. Sienna narrowed her eyes while staring at Melkith and Reincarnted. One had secluded herself her entire life for the sake of research, while the other was a madwoman who was as far removed from fresh as possible. Moreover, the age of the two of them was... Sienna cleared her throat. Did age really matter? She immediately reconsidered her thoughts. Anyway, considering their backgrounds and personalities, neither of them could fulfill Sienna's wishes. She had to choose someone. Christina won't do, Sienna thought. Apart from Anissa's presence, Christina's own personality was dark, sly, and snake-like. In some ways, she even surpassed Anisse. Still, Sienna considered briefly. Could that child really be considered refreshing? Wasn't her tearful, sniffling crying closer to being sour than refreshing? Still, if she had to choose, she preferred Christina to Melkith and Reincarnted and Seal to Christina. Go eat by yourselves. I'm busy today, said Sienna. Lies, accused Melkith. What lie? I really am busy. I have things to do today, said Sienna. Excuse me, Lady Sienna, but I believe you have no appointments today. Isn't the appointment regarding the Young Magician of the Year award tomorrow at noon? Reincarnted stuttered. How does she know that? Sienna felt a chill and averted her eyes while Reincarnted immediately bowed her head. It's something else, said Sienna. Sister, are you meeting a man? Asked Melkith. Ehem. Before Sienna could respond, Lovelian cleared his throat extra loudly. He slammed the desk with his hand and stood up abruptly. White Tower Master. Watch your words, he shouted. Watch my words. What's wrong with asking if she's meeting a man? Muttered Melkith. It's an inappropriate question. Lady Sienna would never meet another man. Lovelian shouted. He believed Eugene Lionheart to be the reincarnation of the stupid Hamel. He hadn't received direct confirmation, but the circumstances made it seem undeniable. This fact was known only to Lovelian among the archwizards. This was a love between heroes that spanned 300 years. He wanted to shout it from the rooftops and make the truth known to the whole world, but he had to restrain himself. As such, he couldn't stand that this madwoman was trampling and insulting the hero's love. On the other hand, Melkith couldn't understand why Lovelian was glaring at her so intensely. "Anyway, I really do have something to attend to, so I'll be going," said Sienna. "Sister." "What man?" Melkith clung persistently, and Lovelian interrupted with a loud shout. "White Tower Master." Did the mind follow the body? These elders, who could well be grandparents based on their age, behaved inappropriately like youngsters due to their physically youthful bodies. Blue Tower Master Herodotus thought this phenomenon could make for an interesting magical study. It might be possible that reaching the 8th circle not only refreshes one's body but also the brain. Does that allow for their minds to age backward? Herodotus Usland wondered. This theory seemed particularly relevant in this gathering as well. Wizards like Mays and Harrington, who had recently achieved Archwizard status, were struggling to keep up with the conversations of their older yet seemingly younger counterparts. Further specialized research was necessary to validate the theory that older archwizards might not act their age due to magical rejuvenation. But if the hypothesis held true, it could explain why even long-established archwizards sometimes behaved in ways unbecoming of their years. Ignoring the noise, Sienna descended from the Hall of Akron and stepped outside. She had not been lying when she said she had matters to attend to. Eugene would soon return for the war. "It's not fit to be called a war, is it?" she thought. She was aware of various nations mobilizing troops for war. Were they seeking to mark their presence on the continent, or did they hope their accomplished sons would gain enlightenment through war? The old king of Aroth would send Prince Honian Abram as his royal representative, and Tremple would lead a battalion of elite wizards to support Eugene. It wasn't limited to just Aroth either. Keel would dispatch Alchester Dragonic, the White Dragon Knights, and the Lionheart's elites. The Beast King himself would lead the White Fangs from Roar. Uras would send the Crusaders and the Blood Cross Knights, and Ordus Hyman, the First Knight and the commander of the Violent Tide Knights, would also participate with the Violent Tide Knights from Shimuan. At this point, a pretext for war seemed unnecessary. Honestly, Sienna thought concentrating such military power was an overkill. She alone could destroy a nation without a need for an army. If it's getting rid of the Black Wizards while leaving Nahama untouched, we could do it on our own, Sienna mused. Eugene surely knew this. His choice to wage such a grand war was symbolic. He intended to publicly and brutally crush Nahama's Black Wizards and Amelia Merwin. It was a spectacle to elevate the hero Eugene Lionheart. He would turn Amelia and Nahama into sacrifices for his fame. In addition, the war itself would serve as a declaration against the continent and Helmuth. This may not have the impact of killing a demon king, but faith in Eugene will certainly rise, Sienna concluded. In fact, the repercussions from the war might even surpass killing Iris. In the end, only a few hundred had witnessed him defeating the demon king. But if killing Amelia took the form of a convincing war in Nahama, it could cause ripples to spread wider. Yet for her, today's agenda was more pressing than the war in Nahama. It did involve a man in line with Melkith's nonsense. Soon Eugene would return. Frankly, she was more concerned about how she would look while greeting Eugene than the upcoming war preparations. She wanted their reunion to be unforgettable. She wanted to surprise him. This reunion in particular felt even more significant. The two of them had been apart for more than half a year. During that period, Christina and Anise had been clinging to him like a two-headed serpent. Sure, Mare, Rhaenyra and Molan had been there as well. She hoped those serpents hadn't done anything sly and profane. But still, one could never be too sure, right? Besides, they had been in Giabella City for the past month. Today everyone went to the swimming pool. Naturally, they wouldn't be wearing regular clothes there, so they must have worn swimsuits. The Queen of Whores had intervened as well. Last time too, Sienna thought, annoyed. The scandal that started in Giabella Park and heated up Helmuth spread across the continent. It was contained before spiraling out of control due to the influence of the Lionheart family, the Emperor, the Pope and Sienna. Regardless, the scandal happened and Sienna had seen the photos herself. The ring. Sienna hadn't received a ring from Eugene yet. All she had received was a cloak. Christina and Anise had received necklaces and various clothes. But for Sienna it was just a cloak. Or did I receive clothes too? Sienna questioned for a second. But was that even important? The real issue was that neither Sienna, Christina, nor Anise had received rings. She tried not to think about it, but the thought intruded her mind. Sienna barely suppressed her rising anger and killing intent. If she, who was nearing divinity, let her anger out, ordinary people in the square could be annihilated. Sienna took a few deep breaths while walking on. Given her reputation, it was difficult to walk freely in such places. With every step or even every breath, fervent followers would flock to her. That's why Sienna always used magic to conceal her presence. Changing her appearance was bothersome and inconvenient, so she used high-level magic to make it impossible for others to recognize her. Of course, Sienna enjoyed the attention of her followers. It was also amusing to see non-followers timidly wanting to approach her, like tourists or ordinary people. But not at times like this. She couldn't enjoy such attention now. Today, Sienna was shopping for clothes to meet Eugene in. She needed an outfit that would evaporate Eugenie's memories of the past 6 months. She needed something beautiful and sacred, befitting a goddess of magic, something that would compel him to unconsciously take out a ring for her. Maybe I should buy a ring too, just in case, Sienna pondered. Just like in the old days, Sienna had already imagined exchanging rings with Eugene, receiving blessings from the world, and even having a wedding ceremony in her mind. Which ring should she choose? Something extravagant would be nice. Sienna crossed the square with a flutter in her heart. The magic Sienna used to inhibit others' perception was something she had crafted personally. Even a great archwizard would find it hard to see through it. It was practically impossible to locate her in a crowded place like this. Had she let her guard down? No. Sienna was being talked about as a goddess of magic, and she was actually approaching the source of magic itself. Even at this moment, Sienna was aware of all the gazes directed at her. But she hadn't noticed the gaze of the specter. Like with Molen, the specter had perfectly concealed its dark power and blended seamlessly into space. Sienna, the specter thought. On the edge of space there, the specter saw Sienna. Her perception-inhibiting magic couldn't blind the eyes of the specter. Sienna Meridian. Her appearance was unchanged. Green eyes and purple hair. The overwhelming surge of emotions was agonizing and tormenting for the specter. Chapter 451, Remains 7. He had heard of how Sienna had lived out her life after the war ended and the pact was made. Sienna lived a life that many found hard to believe. It seemed inconceivable that the same Sienna from his memories lived a lonely and ascetic life before eventually secluding herself. But it made more sense once he realized that her choice was influenced by Hamel's death. It was something Sienna would do. The specter thought about his current form. He bore Hamel's appearance. And although he wasn't perfectly Hamel, he was close enough. He carried Hamel's memories. And although the memories were incomplete, he felt his personality and sense of self were quite similar to Hamel's. Then couldn't he just fill in what was missing? If Hamel hadn't been reincarnated. The specter thought bitterly. The premise itself was flawed. Sienna's return to the world from her seclusion in the Samar rainforest was only because Eugene Lionheart had found and drawn her out. There must have been compelling reasons why she had chosen to seclude herself for nearly 200 years. If Hamel hadn't been reincarnated, Sienna would not be here. It was because of Hamel's reincarnation that Sienna was now here. Sienna seemed in high spirits. She hummed a tune and walked with a bounce like a rubber ball. Was it because her perception-inhibiting magic freed her from the concerns of surrounding gazes? The specter followed her as she skipped like a child while smiling bitterly. Memories that weren't his own surfaced unbidden, and whenever they overlapped with reality, he felt an unpleasant dissonance and self-loathing. Why had he come here? Did he want to confront Sienna like he did with Molen? Did he want to hear her words of rage and murderous condemnation? You're not Hamel. You're a fake. Aside from hearing such things, did he want someone to understand who he truly was? I, Molen Roar, acknowledge you as a warrior. They were his comrades from Hamel's memories. Did he want to be understood by them? And perhaps someday maybe he wouldn't be Hamel or a fake but just him. Perhaps he would be seen as himself even to Hamel and Eugene. The specter sighed deeply. He forcibly ignored the questions crowding his mind. The answers were simple, but he didn't want to face them. Sienna left the square while continuing to hum. The specter silently followed, neither obstructing her path nor attempting to speak to her. He knew why. In the end, it was because he was afraid. After leaving the square, Sienna shifted from walking to flying. Flying was strictly limited for wizards in Arath. but an exception was made for Sienna for all laws concerning magic in the nation. Considering her significant contribution to the nation's magical prowess, Sienna believed it was her right. Her very presence had contributed significantly to Aratha's title as the Magic Kingdom. I must be at least 70% responsible, Sienna thought while flying through the sky. In particular, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that she single-handedly designed Pentagon, the capital of Arath. She had designed the floating stations which could be considered a core element of the capital, as well as the magical barrier of the royal castle Abram. Having poured so much effort into this city, she believed she had the freedom to do as she pleased within it. She thought so and acted whimsically sometimes, though never without calculating or incurring debts. Sienna was evading the eyes of others using her perception-inhibiting magic. For her, taking items from stores would be as easy as breathing. But why would she steal? She wasn't short on money or inclined to commit immoral crimes for the thrill. Yet there was a simple pleasure in sneaking into a store and bypassing the long queue. She could have just shown her face to skip past the long lines, but sometimes, small delights such as these were a necessity. I don't have to worry about gazes, Sienna reasoned with herself. There were times when she had to be mindful of her appearance and actions. It was something that came with being famous and revered. But at times like these, it was necessary to boldly set aside such concern. Sienna had entered a high-end fashion store that was a leader in Pentagon's fashion scene. Had she entered normally, everyone in line would have gossiped and approached her. Sienna didn't want that today. She finally lifted her spell after reaching the VIP salon. It was typically a place set aside for royalty and high nobility, a place located deep inside the store. The noblewoman wasn't startled in the slightest by Sienna's sudden appearance. Today's meeting had been prearranged. The lady greeted Sienna with a bright smile and a respectful bow. "It is an honor to serve you," the noblewoman said respectfully as Sienna quickly scanned the surroundings. Noticing Sienna's vigilant gaze, the noblewoman whispered softly, "Only I, the owner, am aware of Lady Sienna's visit here." "Is that really so?" Sienna inquired. "Would I dare to deceive you, Lady Sienna?" the noblewoman replied. Well, I warned you last time, but my visit today and the reason for it." "Yes. You know what I'm speaking of, right?" said Sienna. "Yes, Lady Sienna. I assure you all of it will remain a secret known only to me until my death. No, even after that," assured the noblewoman. VIP shopping usually involved such secrecy, even if there wasn't a particular reason for the secrecy. The VIPs usually found joy in such acts and tended to be obsessed with the very notion of secrecy itself. However, today's VIP Sienna was exceptionally remarkable even compared to the others. The wise Sienna was one of the most respected names on the continent, and she was the greatest wizard in the history of the continent. Ancilla Lionheart had personally referred her here. Although it was something the owner had already anticipated, Sienna's name alone was enough to make her feel quite nervous. Moreover, Sienna's specific request added to the owner's unease. She wanted dresses to seduce a man. Not just any light seduction either, but something so captivating that it would lead to a marriage proposal. And on top of that, she also asked for rings and gifts. Who could imagine that Sienna, known for her wisdom, would make such a direct and desperate request? "Guess that's why she's emphasizing the secrecy," thought the owner as she carefully approached Sienna, who sat on the sofa. Mannequins wearing the prepared dresses were revealed when the owner pulled back the curtains. The other VIPs usually preferred real models in a secret fashion show, but Sienna had requested no one else be present today. Hence, the dresses were displayed on mannequins. Sienna seemed visibly startled by the mannequins and their dresses. "Bold. Quite bold," she muttered while looking at the first dress. It was so daring that Sienna couldn't imagine herself wearing it. It would reveal quite a depth of her cleavage, armpits and back. It was something that the Queen of Whores might wear. The owner explained, "As you requested something to allure a man." "But, isn't this too much? It's very different from what I usually wear." Sienna hesitated. "It's about creating a stark contrast to your usual self to evoke emotions," the owner suggested. "Contrast? A complete contrast, huh?" Sienna muttered. "I did not limit the choices to just a single style, so please take a look at the next set," said the owner. The owner then unveiled the next series of clothes. The following clothes weren't as provocative or bold as the first. If she had to make a comparison, it was toned down from the Queen of Horrors to Melkte. The next set gave an entirely different feeling of purity and innocence. As Sienna viewed each dress, her feelings fluctuated. Was it because she was getting used to the idea, or was the word contrast mentioned by the owner resonating with her? Strangely enough, she found herself drawn back to the first, most audacious dress. Come to think of it, Sienna had never worn such attire before. Neither had Anise nor Christina, being the saints of their age. Sienna mused that they could not wear such revealing clothes, but then again they might have worn swimsuits at the water park with Eugene today. Have I ever? He wondered. Of course not. No, she had never worn such attire. She had the chance to wear her swimsuit when she was on the island nation of Shimuan. However, Iris, the damned elf, had completely crushed the opportunity after becoming the Demon King. Sienna was never given the chance to be at the beach. Contrast. A complete contrast, she pondered again. Not only the saints but even Seal wouldn't wear something like this. But the more she thought about it, the more she leaned towards the first dress. Sienna could guarantee that only the Queen of Horrors might wear something like that. Eugene might react by swearing if the Queen of Horrors showed up in such an outfit, but he would blush if Sienna appeared in such an outfit. Sienna pondered quietly, weighing her options. But the other dresses also appealed to her. The owner had carefully selected a wide range of outfits, which numbered in the dozens. But each outfit was unique and captivating. Given that Sienna had dedicated half of her life to battling in the Devildom and the other half to magic, she had little experience with diverse clothing styles. Her usual attire had been limited to robes and cloaks, occasionally altered slightly in consideration of Eugene. However, nothing she wore until now could come even close to the expertly crafted fashion before her. This made choosing difficult. No, but why was she having such thoughts? Just as she did with magic, Sienna broke through the conventional limitations of thinking and found her answer. Why did she have to choose just one when all of them appealed to her? It's not like I don't have money, she justified to herself. She beamed with satisfaction. She was pleased with her conclusion. I'll take them all, declared Sienna. All of them? The owner asked, taken aback. Yes, confirmed Sienna. Very well, I'll prepare them, the owner acknowledged before asking, would you like to try any on before? That won't be necessary, Sienna quickly interjected. Despite the promise of secrecy, she wasn't keen on showcasing herself in such attire to the owner. Ideally, and if possible, she wanted Eugene to be the first to see her in such a daring outfit. Understood. Then next, let me show you the rings we've prepared, the owner suggested. It's not just about what I want. It has to be a ring that would make the other person want to give it, Sienna said. Why would she buy a ring that she hopes to be given? The owner found this concept perplexing but remembered she was dealing with a wise archwizard whose intentions might be beyond ordinary understanding. How could she hope to understand the thoughts of a sage? If that's the case, I may need to know a bit about the person you have in mind to assist you better, said the owner. Are you trying to probe me? Sienna asked in a slightly defensive tone. Absolutely not, the owner reassured. Eventually, Sienna relented, considering the secret was guaranteed. And sooner or later, everyone would come to know, right? Hesitatingly, the owner cautiously asked, Is it Sir Eugene Lionheart? Rumor had it that Sienna and Eugene had danced together at a banquet in Shimuan's royal castle. If the great archwizard had fallen for a man, it could only be her young heroic disciple. But Sienna couldn't readily admit this. Her nature hadn't changed in 300 years. What are you talking about? He's my disciple, said Sienna. Please, Lady Sienna, calm down and listen to me. I've been serving various clients in this city, the capital of the Kingdom of Magic, for decades. Some of them were noble women having secret affairs with young knights or, magical mentors and their apprentices. The mention of mentors and apprentices made Sienna's eyes waver. It might have been a problem centuries ago, but in today's world, a relationship between a mentor and an apprentice isn't a big issue, especially for someone as young and beautiful as you, continued the owner. Ahem. Sienna cleared her throat, feeling a bit conscious. And Sir Eugene Lionheart is a man any woman would fall for. Heir of the Great Vermouth, bearer of the Lionheart name, the hero who defeated the Demon King, exceptionally handsome and immensely talented. A disciple any mentor would dote on and a man any woman would love, the owner praised without restraint. As the owner pressed on, Sienna's cheeks flushed red and she began to fidget nervously. She tugged at her hair and clothes and scratched the sofa. "It's his secret," she whispered while turning her head slightly. Her demeanor was unexpectedly youthful for an archwizard who had lived for 3 centuries. Moved by her genuine expression, the owner smiled sincerely. "I will do my best to recommend the perfect ring for you," the owner assured. True to her word, the owner presented a variety of rings and even briefly left the salon to bring additional choices, including personal items she had never intended to sell. Although she was flushed, shy, and contemplative, Sienna looked genuinely happy as she hesitantly touched the dresses and considered trying them on before shaking her head dismissively, trying on various rings and smiling blissfully. She looked happy. She looked genuinely happy. The specter stood silently while observing Sienna's laughter for a long time. Honestly, he had thought it wouldn't affect him. After all, he knew about Sienna and Hamel's feelings. So that's how it is, he mused, feeling a tumultuous stirring in his heart. There was a flicker of flame igniting deep within his heart. His head spun and his fingers trembled. Was this betrayal? Or sorrow? The world he saw upon leaving Revesta was peaceful. Molen seemed unable to move freely. Molen had acknowledged him as a warrior. Sienna appeared happy as she envisioned a future with Eugene. The specter wanted to be called Hamel by Sienna and Molen. He desired to seize everything the reincarnated Hamel had. He still yearned to be Hamel. Turning his back, the specter stood alone in the midst of the sky while caressing his face. Even these desires were his own. The conclusion he had reached now was also his own. There was no need to distinguish them. Even though he possessed Hamel's memories and a persona mimicking Hamel, he was in the end himself. "That's right," he whispered, his finger grazing his cheek. He was resolute and prepared. What he would do from now on and in the future, he was convinced it was for himself. It would add value to his existence. He had seriously considered ripping his face off. But that would likely lead to more inconvenience. Or should he change his face? That idea didn't appeal to him much. More precisely, he was unsure how to go about it. In the first place, is the face really that important? The specter asked himself. It mattered if he showed it around. But continuing with Hamel's face seemed like it would be tarnishing Hamel's name. If he kept showing this face to the world, it would go from stupid Hamel to bastard Hamel. No, it wouldn't end there. He might even become the most notoriously evil figure in the world. He didn't want that. So the specter decided to wear a mask. A plain white one with only holes for the eyes and no designs. You wouldn't want Hamel's name to be sullied more than it already is. The specter talked to Hamel's comrades in his mind. He felt the same. The specter smiled wryly while looking ahead. They cared about bad reputation and were considerate about it. "It's something you'd hate, but I have no choice," he chuckled to himself while steadying his wavering heart. "This is right for me," he reassured once more. It was something the specter didn't want to do, something he disliked. But he had no intention of backing down. He gazed at the Black Lion Castle in the distance. Chapter 452, The Black Lion Castle. The Uklas mountain range lined the southernmost border of the Kiel Empire. This rugged, mountainous border had been guarded by the Black Lion Knights of the Lionheart clan for the past 300 years. Up until now, the Black Lion Knights had prevented all attempts made to cross the border by the barbarians from the Samar rainforest. Even if they did receive some support from the Empire's border defense army to do so, the Black Lions couldn't help but be overwhelmingly busy as they had to juggle their duties with handling the Lionheart clan's internal matters as well as keeping up the training of their knightly order. However, starting from next month, they would have much more leeway with their time than they had ever had before. This was because the hundreds of tribes living within the gigantic Samar rainforest would be integrating into a single greater tribe. The Zoran tribe. It was a large tribe that had been competing for hegemony within the Samar rainforest from the very beginning of the tribe's history. The young 23-year-old chief of the tribe, Ivatar Zahav, had succeeded the position of tribal chief just 2 years ago. Ivatar had then destroyed the Kochilla tribe, which had been spreading chaos throughout the forest at that time, and had erected the Zoran tribe's flagpole on their former enemy's territory. This incredible feat wasn't accomplished by Ivatar and the Zoran alone. The Zorans were able to win their war against the Kochillas because of the help they received from the hero Eugene Lionheart, Saint Christina Rogerus, and the Tower Masters of Aroth. However, it was Ivatar who had personally gone to the Lionhearts to look for their help. The warriors of the rainforest had recognized the young great chief's power and wisdom and had submitted themselves to him, voluntarily tattooing the Zoran tribe's markings onto their bodies. 2 years after that, the Zoran tribe, led by their great chief Ivatar, managed to achieve something that no person or tribe in the entire history of the rainforest had ever achieved: a grand unification of all the tribes in the forest. Ivatar also established new laws for the rainforest and declared that his people would never attempt to invade the Keel Empire by crossing the Uklas mountain range. The great chief Ivatar Jahov, a man, frowned thoughtfully. The declaration hadn't just been empty words. Ivatar had publicly revealed his friendship with Eugene Lionheart and expressed his respect for the Lionheart clan and the Keel Empire. This had taken place at an exchange of ideas during the banquet in Shimuan a year ago. He has a backbone that is almost unbelievable for someone of only 23 years of age. If he had been born at any other time, he could have aimed to become the protagonist of the era, the man admitted. With such youthful spirit, ambition, and fate, Ivatar could have eventually climbed out of the forest and attempted to conquer the entire continent. However, Ivatar wouldn't be able to reach such a heaven-defying fate. Because the protagonist of today's era wasn't Ivatar. Such were the thoughts of Klein Lionheart, the head of the council for the Lionheart clan. Klein Lionheart didn't have the slightest doubt about the previous statement. Even someone other than Klein would have given the same response when asked, who was the current protagonist of the continent, no, of the entire era? It was the hero Eugene Lionheart. Since Eugene was born into the world, the era had begun to change. The changes brought about by Eugene had left their mark on the most recent pages of history. If Eugene had not arrived in this world, the continent wouldn't have been able to survive until this day. The reason that the Zorans were able to conquer the entire rainforest is also thanks to the help that Eugene gave them in their war against the Coachillas. So the Zoran are willing to make an alliance with the Lionhearts and Keel is also because of Eugene, Klein mused. In land area alone, the rainforest could rival an empire, and it was impossible to estimate the exact number of the tribal natives who lived in the rainforest while rejecting more advanced forms of civilization. The native inhabitants of the rainforest were truly savages. Or at least that had been the case until now. Ivatar wanted peace with Keel. He had also expressed his intention to slowly adopt civilization while avoiding crossing the line that would force the tribes to resist his efforts. Ivatar also hoped to have various exchanges with the Lionheart clan. Klein had no reason to refuse him. The Lionheart clan was a martial clan with 300 years of history. At the same time, it was the sole lineage left by the continent's last hero and was also the family to which the current hero Eugene belonged. When the time came for Eugene to battle against the Demon King of Incarceration, the Lionhearts would raise their swords for Eugene and stand at the front line of the battle. They were also in a situation where a war with Nahama was imminent. Even after devoting most of their time to training, it still felt like that wasn't enough. But with the Zoran tribe uniting the rainforest, that would free up the time usually spent guarding the border. In addition to that, the great chief Ivatar was making a personal visit to the Black Lion Castle while leading his most elite warriors to take part in some joint training with the Black Lion Knights. As a warrior, Klein was pleased to see this take place, but he still let out a reluctant sigh. If at all possible, I had hoped that something like this would only happen after I was already dead. Klein had never once intended to become the head of the council. Klein had always seen himself living a leisurely and peaceful retirement in his later years, then either dying at an appropriate age or going into seclusion. Don't spout such weak words, Klein. Carmen, standing next to him with her arms crossed, shot him a glare. Initially, she and the 3rd Division, which she led, were meant to be stationed at the main estate along with Guillaume and his 5th Division, but they had arrived here today at the Black Lion Castle to serve as Ivatar's opponents. Unlike Klein, who, despite his muscular appearance, was sporting gray in his hair and beard, Carmen maintained a perfectly youthful body and face. If anyone who didn't know the actual situation were to look at Carmen and Klein, they would think that the two were grandfather and granddaughter. However, the two were actually siblings. Moreover, Carmen was even Klein's older sister. Currently, Carmen was the most senior elder of the Lionheart clan, and even including the collateral lines, there were very few people who were older than Carmen. As such, by all rights, Carmen should have become the head of the council. but she had insisted that she would not be stepping down from her active duty as a Black Lion and had instead shoved the honor of becoming the head of the council onto her younger brother Klein. Subjugating all of the Demon Kings was the will of our founding ancestor, the Great Vermouth, and the mission of our Lionheart clan. To think that you wouldn't feel grateful and honored to have lived to see the era in which our mission will finally be fulfilled, and are instead letting out such weak words. Can you even still call yourself the younger brother of the Silver Lion and the head of the council for the Lionheart clan? Carmen scolded as her golden eyes flashed dangerously. As befitting of a younger brother who had been tormented by Carmen ever since their childhood, Klein hunched his shoulders and said, "Sister, I didn't mean it like that. It's just, if at all possible." Carmen silenced him. "Shut up, Klein." Klein meekly obeyed. Carmen frowned. "Could it be that your heart really hasn't been set pounding by the turbulence of this era? In my case, I am glad that I can help fulfill the Lionheart clan's mission while I am still in my prime. I'm also excited to be able to see a hero like our founding ancestor with my own eyes, and even more excited to be able to fight the Demon Kings along with him." Klein stayed silent. "Together with the hero, I will be able to complete my path as a true knight. After we finish chastising Nahama, which has been led astray by the evil of black magic, we will eventually battle against the Demon King of Incarceration. My blood boils when I imagine raising the Lionheart flag high over the battlefield once everything is over," Carmen said excitedly. Klein didn't respond. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Carmen demanded. "How dare you ignore me when I'm speaking? But you're the one who told me to shut up, big sis." Struck by Carmen's piercing glare, Klein quickly changed the subject. "To think that my great-grandnephew would turn out to be the hero. I can't believe that he's already defeated a Demon King. I still can't help but wonder if this is a dream. If I hit you, you should be able to tell right away whether or not this is a dream," Carmen threatened. "Big sis, please take my age into consideration." Klein suddenly stopped talking. It wasn't because he had sensed anything strange, but because he had noticed a change in Carmen's expression. "Big sis?" Klein tentatively questioned. Carmen's face was so stiff that it was hard to believe they had just been conversing casually. But Carmen wasn't the only one who managed to feel it. As Seal felt a creepy and ominous feeling wash over her, she instinctively covered her left eye with one hand. It felt like something was writhing around inside of her eye. In fact, something that looked like black ink was staining the whites of her left eye, but Seal didn't have the time to pay any attention to what color her eye currently was. Seal had felt this current sensation somewhere before. It was from when they were still at sea during the subjugation of the Demon King of Fury. Seal was reminded of when she had followed Eugene after his consciousness was engulfed by the rampaging moonlight sword and what she had seen within that mysterious void. Something was coming. Apart from Carmen and Seal, the number of people who had sensed the ominous presence approaching them increased one by one. "Just what is that?" Cyan, the prospective patriarch of the Lionheart clan, wondered. Even without taking into account his current position within the family, Cyan happened to have a personal connection with Ivatar. He had also been interested in the joint training that was about to take place between the Zoran tribe's warriors and the Black Lions. Cyan had been feeling frustrated because he was finding it difficult to overcome the barrier between him and the fifth star of the White Flame formula, which had led him to be present in the Black Lion Castle at this moment. But Cyan didn't waste any time with any pathetic notions of regret at having to come here today. Instead, Cyan had a different thought. While clutching at his pounding chest, Cyan's head spun to the side, and he shouted, "I immediately request support from the main estate." Cyan had given this order to a Black Lion who was stationed nearby. But was there really any meaning to requesting support from the main estate? Among the forces currently stationed at the main estate, the strongest were Gilead, the patriarch of the family, and Guion, the captain of the 5th Division. Both were experts who had managed to reach the 7th star of the White Flame formula. But even if they managed to arrive in time, would they really be able to face that ominous presence? Even if they brought the entire order of the Knights of the White Lion with them, Gilead and Guion still wouldn't be a match for that thing. However, once they received a request for support from the Black Lion Castle, the main estate would immediately report the emergency to Sienna in Aroth. As long as the wise Sienna managed to arrive in time with the other archwizards. Cyan gasped for breath as he readied Geddon's shield and the devouring sword Asphalt to defend himself. The Black Lion Castle was also accessible by Warp Gate. How much time would it take for the main estate to react to the request for support and send help back through the Warp Gate? There was no way of knowing. But even so, Cyan had no intention of turning and fleeing immediately. He was the future patriarch of the Lionheart clan. He was the brother of the hero Eugene Lionheart. There is no way that I could do something so shameful as to run away in fear, Cyan thought to himself. Everyone present had the same thoughts as Cyan. They couldn't tell what exactly it was, but they could all sense that something disturbing, terrifying, and ominous was approaching them. However, not a single person threw down their weapons and tried to run away. It was the unity brought about by their shared name as the Lionhearts that led all of the Black Lions to ready their weapons. If you want to run away, then go ahead and do so, Ivatar spat out as he suppressed the urge to gasp for breath. He and the warriors from the Zoran tribe weren't a part of the Lionheart clan. However, what was more important than that fact was the pride that they all held in being warriors. He might currently be occupying the position of Great Chief of the Samar Rainforest, but Ivatar believed his identity as a warrior came before his identity as the Great Chief. In the end, every single one of the hundreds of knights and warriors currently present chose not to flee despite the mysterious and ominous presence they sensed approaching them. When will it strike? From which direction? And how will it attack? Nothing could be seen with the naked eye. The only thing they could make out was that the ominous sensation grew stronger as it gradually drew closer. They still couldn't be sure where the sensation was even coming from. The mysterious presence suddenly manifested itself. A figure appeared in the skies above the forest that was going to be used as the site for the Lionheart and Zoran tribes' joint training. It was currently night with the sun having already set. So when the figure suddenly manifested itself, standing in the middle of the night sky and surrounded by a fog-like gray mist, it stood out against the bright canvas of the sky illuminated with countless stars and the radiant moon. The figure was revealed to be that of a tall, well-built man. However, there was no way to make out his face. This was because the man was wearing a white mask that covered his whole face. The only facial feature that could be made out was his dull, sunken eyes. Everyone's hearts were pounding. Nothing had actually happened yet. The only thing that had happened was that someone suddenly appeared standing in the night sky. Yet even so, everyone below felt their heart begin to race violently. They even felt like they might just collapse onto the ground without even realizing it. Carmen gritted her teeth. She had felt this sensation once before. When they faced the Demon King of Fury while at sea, her body had frozen in terror and she was unable to move properly. Carmen had vowed that she would never again allow herself to be overcome with terror when facing such a demon, however. Just what even is he? Carmen wondered. The aura of power around the man was such that it made even the Demon King of Fury seem laughable. It felt like dark power, but there was something foreign about it. Nor was that really the case. It wasn't truly unfamiliar either. It reminded Carmen of when Eugene had used the Moonlight Sword. No, it's different, Carmen realized. This feeling was far worse. If it had been at any other time, Carmen would have been far more focused on that pure white mask. But the current Carmen didn't have the mental capacity to spare for such thoughts. Fwish. White flames engulfed Carmen. These were the flames of the 8th star of the White Flame formula, the highest level that any of the Lionhearts had been able to achieve since their founding ancestor, Vermouth. Carmen pulled her pocket watch out from her vest. In her head, she could picture her subsequent movements. She would leap up towards him and attack while shouting the same thing she always did: form change. But she wasn't able to do any of that. This was because the figure, which had been floating in the sky just moments ago, had at some point arrived right in front of Carmen. This was the Spectre's first time seeing Carmen in person. However, he knew who she was. Ever since he had first been resurrected as a Death Knight and had become possessed with a desire for revenge against his former comrades, he had been gathering information about the Lionheart clan, those who had inherited Vermouth's blood. Carmen Lionheart, the Spectre recalled. With the exception of Eugene, Carmen was said to be the most skilled expert in the entire clan. It would seem that such an assessment had been made without any exaggeration. Faced with such a level of skill before he had become the incarnation of destruction, he would surely have struggled. Was I really that weak? The Spectre asked himself. As the Spectre raised his hand, Carmen was left without any time to even shout form change. Click click click. But at the same time that Carmen suddenly swung a punch at him, the pocket watch transformed into a heavy gauntlet around her fist. The wind pressure and flames released by the force of her fist pushed away the nearby Klein. As Carmen's gray hair fluttered in the air, the flames around her expanded. Her punches were launched one after another. Carmen then leaped towards the flames she had just expelled, and the scattered flames of the white flame formula, which had been fluttering around her like a lion's mane, were pulled back towards Carmen once more. The gauntlet's form shifted. Carmen's fist, which had grown so large that it seemed out of balance with the rest of her body, pierced through the flames. Boom! What a heavy blow, the specter observed. Carmen's outstretched fist had made contact with something. However, there was no sensation of having damaged or broken the object she had struck. It was like she had hit a wall that could never be broken. Instead, it felt like the fist she had used to hit him would be the first to break. But that didn't prevent Carmen from pulling her fist back for another attempt. Transform, Carmen said as pure white light erupted from the exact center of the Black Lion's dress uniform that Carmen was wearing. Thick light that was as sharp as a razor tore through the uniform. This intense light enveloped Carmen's whole body. This was the transformation sequence for one of Shimuan's greatest assets, a magic set of armor that had been made using a part of a dragon heart, the Exit. On top of that, Carmen's exclusive set of armor had been reinforced by Gundor and the other dwarven craftsmen using the scales and leather of Rhyzakia. White Flame Dragon, Carmen shouted as her transformation came to an end. Now wearing a black and silver-colored Exit, Carmen raised her left fist while her right fist was still extended. Initially, while her right hand was equipped with the Heaven Genocide, her left hand wasn't wearing any equivalent piece of equipment. But that was no longer the case after she had transformed. The Lion Dragon's left arm seemed to transform into the left arm of the Demon Dragon, as Carmen's arm was wrapped in flames of pure mana. The nails of her left hand were now sharp enough to match the power of Heaven Genocide. Carmen's eyes flashed as her Demon Dragon's left arm was shot forward. The flames amplified by the dragon heart created the image of a massive dragon around her fist. Boom! With a loud explosion, the specter's body flew backward. In fact, it was possible for him to have withstood the blow without flying backward or even dodging the attack, but the specter hadn't chosen to do so. He had seen what Carmen Lionheart was capable of. That was enough for now. The specter halted the flight of his body and landed on the ground. "That's how it is, HM," the specter muttered. Right as the specter landed on the ground, a surge of killing intent, along with actual attacks, came flying at him from all directions. The specter continued to muse. So these are the descendants of Vermouth. This was the Lionheart clan. The fact that not a single person had tried to escape brought a smile to the specter's face. Chapter 453, Rage 1. Although this was only natural, there was no one here who could see through to the true identity of the specter. Even Cyan, who had once encountered the specter in the Samar rainforest, was unable to recognize him as he was now. This wasn't just because his face was covered by a mask. It was also because his very presence itself had changed so drastically. Even though he was just standing there quietly, he gave off such an intimidating aura that it caused everyone looking at him to break out in goosebumps. However, just because they couldn't guess his identity didn't give them any reason to hesitate before attacking. That was just how blatantly the specter's very presence was currently communicating his intentions. He was exuding such an ominous and evil aura of power that it made everyone instinctively want to take a step back. The source of this aura didn't seem to simply originate from his dark power. No one here had ever felt such a sinister dark power coming from any black wizard or even a demon folk. This meant that this mysterious figure had to be a demon king, or at least a being on a similar level to one. Everyone here had instinctively realized this fact. Carmen, who had transformed into a fiery white dragon, charged at the specter. Making his move at the same time that she had, Genos also kicked off the ground. Genos may not have been able to practice the white flame formula, but in terms of skill proficiency alone, he was ranked second only to Carmen in the Black Lion Knights. Genos' skills were from the Hamel style. The specter was naturally able to recognize this fact as soon as he saw it. Neither of the two knights knew their opponent's identity. However, they instinctively knew that this was someone that they couldn't handle on their own. It was a being that shouldn't be fought that made them not want to fight. But if everyone here were to honestly submit to their fears, nobody would be left to step forward. So just as Carmen had overcome her terror and charged out to meet him, so had Genos. After all, this was the Black Lion Castle, the fief of the Lionheart clan with 300 years of history behind it. Genos' body was engulfed by red-hot flames of mana. This situation was different from the time with Yuet when an insider had betrayed the clan. This was purely an invasion by an enemy. One who hadn't even brought an army with them. Just a single person had dared to intrude into the Lionheart clan's territory. It didn't matter whether or not they could actually kill him. The important thing was that they couldn't just back down from such an opponent. In this, both Genos and Carmen's thoughts coincided. Even though Carmen and Genos had just joined forces without any prior planning, the movements of the two were as smooth as if they had done this hundreds or even thousands of times before. The Azura rampage that Genos had trained for all of his life and Carmen's lightning flash both struck the Spectre at the same time. So this is Genos Lionheart, the Spectre thought. The heir to the Hamel style. The Spectre felt a wry sense of gratitude as he created a sword from his dark power. To be honest, if he could have his way, he wanted to respond to Genos with an identical Azura rampage or one of Hamel's other techniques. However, the Spectre didn't choose to do so. He didn't want to reveal that he was Hamel's Death Knight at a place like this. To be more precise, he didn't want Hamel's name to be tarnished by his current actions. So, the Spectre's attack couldn't be something that he had learned before. It couldn't be an attack that was easy to handle or light enough to be overcome with a blind swing of the sword either. So, since he had to hide his techniques, he needed to apply an even greater force to make up for that. This wasn't a difficult task for the Spectre. As the incarnation of destruction, his reserves of dark power were infinite. The dark power of destruction was such a destructive force that most who tried to wield it were unable to control it. Until now, many of destruction's former vassals had self-destructed due to the dark power of destruction, but there was no such risk for the Spectre. Just like how a warrior could draw mana from his core, the Spectre was able to draw on the dark power of destruction. Plong. The moment that the Azura rampage and lightning flash reached the Spectre, they collided with the dark power of destruction and were erased. But this violent dark power wasn't satisfied with merely extinguishing the attacks. The dark power spread out and formed a storm centered around the Spectre. Whatever this power was, it was dangerous. Both Carmen and Genos shared the same thought. The two immediately leaped backward as they readied their next attacks. The other people present also began to move. Excluding Guillaume, who wasn't here, and Carmen and Genos, who had already made their moves, the remaining 7 Black Lion captains led the knights under their command to attack the figure. In an instant, the Spectre was surrounded by hundreds of knights, and on the outside of this encirclement, the warriors of the Zoran tribe were creating a second wall around the figure. This suppressive formation made it obvious that they were attempting to consume the Spectre in a battle of attrition. 1. With this formation, the captains could either take turns to attack and weaken their opponent, or they could just attack from all sides. Whichever way they chose to attack, their determination to put all their power into suppressing a single person could be felt strongly. The Spectre was all alone and there were hundreds of them. However, they all knew the truth. Even with these hundreds of allied troops working together, it was still impossible for them to deal with this figure. Even if the strongest among them, the captains and the council elders, were to attack him at the same time, it would still be impossible for them to defeat this figure. As such, they just had to wait for their reinforcements to arrive. They needed to hold on until then while also minimizing the damage to their own troops. It's pointless for them to try and drag out the time like this, the Spectre scoffed to himself. Were they waiting for the reinforcements from the main estate? For the archwizards of Arath? Or maybe even the wise Sienna? The Spectre didn't really want to let this battle get too large, and he especially didn't want to fight Sienna. Perhaps the one whom they were truly waiting for was Eugene Lionheart, who was currently in Giabella Park. The Spectre didn't really want to fight with Eugene either. Or at least he didn't want the clash between them to take place here. As such, he had already blocked all the paths through which reinforcements could arrive. He had sealed the warp gate, and a field of dark power had been deployed to block any communication spells. Under such conditions, it was impossible for any outside reinforcements to make their way over. That said, he didn't want to prolong this battle for too long either. Every single one of them had shown their spirit by not running away, even though they knew they were facing someone whose level far outclassed them. It wasn't just the knights of the Lionheart clan. Even the tribal natives who had come here from the rainforest had shown that they had a sense of honor and pride. I, Molan Roar, acknowledge you as a warrior. While recalling those words, the Spectre gave a wry smile. He wasn't just doing this because he had been recognized as a warrior. The Spectre who was born from Hamel wanted to respect those who had shown both honor and pride. The Spectre slowly took a deep breath. Time suddenly seemed like it was flowing slowly. The actual flow of time may not have been altered, but time as it was being experienced by the Spectre stretched out until it felt like a moment was an eternity. The specter examined all of the killing intents being directed at him, and he was able to predict all of the possible attacks that would be accompanied by their killing intents. He read the path of both Genos and Carmen's attacks. He calculated how their differently colored flames would react to each other, harmonize, and then amplify the combined result. He knew just how destructive the force of their combined attack would be. But these two aren't the main threat, the specter realized. He could feel a violent force coming from behind them. He could feel a power that seemed to be drawing strength from the entire earth. Or, to put it metaphorically, it felt as if an immense tree was about to attack him with its roots. This power was something of a different nature from the strength that humans could achieve through pure training alone. As the incarnation of destruction, the specter understood just what kind of power this was. This power had the traits of a miracle, a blessing, and a protection. Thus, it could only belong to someone who had received the protection of the world tree and the blessing of the entire rainforest. The specter shuddered slightly as he realized that this knowledge wasn't something that he had learned on his own but had instead been carved into his mind at some point. The specter questioned, was it Vermouth? Or perhaps could it have been the demon king of destruction? The specter's perception of time was still in a slowed state. He saw Ivatar leaping towards him while brandishing an axe with both hands. Meanwhile, Carmen and Genos' attack was already colliding against the specter's dark power and slowly drilling in. As for the captains and elders who stood at the forefront of the encirclement, flames of mana aroused by their killing intents ignited on their raised blades as they faced a gradually growing storm of dark power. The moment that Carmen and Genos' attack had ended, they would launch their own strikes one after another, and Ivatar, who was leaping over from the rear, would slam his axe down onto the specter's head. There's something else mixed into this, the specter realized as he extended his senses. By doing so, he detected a male and female duo who had yet to take action. One of the pair was a young woman glaring at him from amid the other black lions. As this was his first time seeing her in person, the specter couldn't know that the woman's name was Seal Lionheart. However, he could tell that her left eye was something different from the eyes of the other black lions. It had a dull golden color, but strangely enough, that eye gave him a completely inhuman feeling. Still, in the midst of his slowed perception of time, he saw the color of her eye gradually begin to change. When a dark red color began to spread from her pupil, the specter realized that the power contained within that eye wasn't a type of magic but instead a demon eye. How could a human have a demon eye? The specter asked himself in disbelief. His first thought was that this was absurd. The knowledge inherited from Hamel couldn't explain how such a thing could have happened. However, through his own experiences, the specter understood how such a thing might not necessarily be as absurd as he first thought. The specter recalled the sight of Vermouth seated within the Temple of Destruction. The specter was the only one experiencing a slowed perception of time. For everyone else apart from the specter, the flow of time hadn't changed in the slightest. Carmen and Genos gave it their all as they tried to break through the specter's dark power. Waiting for them to pull back, the captains and elders got ready to launch their own attacks as Ivatar dropped down from above with his axe. Seal's eye had turned completely red as she activated the ability of her demon eye, the demon eye of immobility. As long as she had enough mana, her demon eye had the ability to restrain even a demon king, even if it was only for a few moments. So, the power of her demon eye should have been able to immobilize the specter. But before the ability could take effect, Seal was left coughing up blood. The dark power of destruction was able to flow back through the restraints that her power had tried to place on the specter and then destroyed the connection. The mana that had been pouring down through the connection to fuel her power snapped back, causing damage to her core. Seal stumbled, still coughing up blood. Hush! The dark power of destruction roused the storm to grow even larger. Carmen's right arm, which was still covered by heaven genocide, was twisted backward. Genos' sword, which he had used as a focus for his sword force, shattered into pieces and disappeared. Falling from the sky, Ivatar glared at the center of the storm as he let out a roar. His axe, filled with immense power, struck down as if to crush the storm. However, it failed. His axe was disintegrated and Ivatar himself was swept away by the surge of dark power. Although a completely different situation to what they had planned had occurred, what the captains and elders needed to do hadn't changed. While letting out shouts, they swung their weapons at the storm. The specter walked freely through the storm. Ignoring how his dark power was busily extending its reach, the specter raised his hands. Click click click. His dark gray power condensed and transformed into a huge sword. The specter held this sword that was much larger than his own body in both hands and twisted his body to the side. Boom! The great sword cut through space itself, and the storm of dark power was transformed into dozens of flying slashes. And just like how this sounded, a whirlwind of blades was sent spreading in all directions. Seal! Cyan screamed out a warning as he leaped in front of Seal. Raising Geddon's shield and swinging Asphal, he stood in front of Seal. The other warriors and knights also swung their weapons in an attempt to resist the gust of blades. However, the dark power of destruction easily shattered both their sword force and mana. In mere moments, a strong smell of blood was left wafting through the forest. The whirlwind of blades dissipated. The specter leaned the great sword down onto his shoulder, which he had swung only once. He had wiped them all out with the last attack, or at least, that was what he had ever so slightly been hoping for. He had even packed enough dark power into that last blow to make it a strong possibility. There certainly were quite a few people who had collapsed. However, an overwhelmingly greater number of people were standing back up. To be more precise, there were many people who should have collapsed but who had somehow forced themselves to stand up. The specter unconsciously let out a smile at this sight. He felt a genuine respect for them. "Just who on earth are you?" Carmen demanded as she staggered to her feet. Forcing her dislocated and broken right arm back into place, she glared at the specter. Genos also got to his feet even as he was coughing up blood. His sword may have been destroyed, but the flames of his red flame formula formed into a new blade. The specter hesitated. How should he answer her question? The specter shook his head with a wry grin. He found that he didn't even have a name that he could use to introduce himself. But was a name really all that important? Instead of agonizing over that question, the specter took a step forward. The great sword on his shoulder dissipated into dark power, and at the same time the specter's figure disappeared. All that was left was the sword. Hundreds of swords covered their entire field of vision. Although it seemed like the specter had only swung a sword that one time, that single sword strike had created hundreds of different slashes and thrusts. There was no time to distinguish between which ones were real and which were only feints. Carmen's right arm and fingers were broken. Although she had forced the shoulder joint back into place, it should still be impossible for her to make delicate movements. Crick 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 crick. Heaven Genocide forcefully underwent a transformation. Even as her fingers twisted in agonizing pain, Carmen didn't let out a single moan. Her fist, now transformed into the Destiny form, pierced through his slashes. But, unlike the power it had first shown, her fist only managed to land a light touch on the specter when she hit him. Gasping for breath, Carmen glared at the specter. "That was impressive," the specter said, sincerely recognizing Carmen's pride as a warrior. The dark power of destruction was able to destroy all mana through contact alone. However, Carmen's white flames had managed to resist the dark power of destruction and pierce through his slash. Although the specter's observation didn't feel like ridicule, Carmen still felt an intense rage. "What do you even want from us?" Carmen demanded once more. The slashes she hadn't been able to stop had swept through their surroundings again. From those knights and warriors who had already had to force themselves to stand up, the number of fallen had increased once more. "Why haven't you killed us?" Carmen asked, frustrated. Even though he had unleashed such a destructive power onto them, not a single one of them had actually died. The weapons that they had held up in resistance had been destroyed. They had also received many injuries. Some were even so seriously injured to the point of not being able to stand back up. This meant that their wounds were by no means light. However, there weren't any fatal injuries and not a single person had died. What did all of this mean? There was no way that Carmen could miss something like this. It meant that this mysterious demon king had no intention of killing any of them. It was under such a condition that he had still managed to defeat everyone here. "Are you here to cause us to despair and fear? If that is the case, you will fail," Carmen spat out, still glaring at the specter. As he returned her gaze, the specter quietly shook his head and said, "I haven't failed." "What?" Carmen voiced her confusion. "I didn't come here to bring you despair and fear," the specter explained, still wearing a mask over his face. Carmen couldn't tell what kind of expression he had behind the mask. The only things visible were his eyes. "I came here to bring you rage," the specter revealed. As he said these words, those eyes were calm and coldly collected. It wasn't the sort of calm that came from not feeling any agitation at all, but instead, it felt as if he had resigned himself to something and was coolly determined. "Rage?" Carmen repeated questioningly, unable to understand what he meant by those words. He had come here to enrage them? But for what purpose? However, Carmen at least knew this much. Just as the specter had said, he had already achieved his goal. He knew that he had been successful. Carmen did indeed feel an unbearable rage towards the specter currently standing in front of her. It wasn't just Carmen who felt that way. Everyone who had encountered the specter here today would feel the same rage towards it. Even though he could kill them at any moment, he hadn't done so. How dare he show them mercy like this? It was an intolerable insult to any knight or warrior. The fear and despair they felt towards that ominous being would never be able to surpass the rage currently being etched deep within them. That's right, a voice was heard from above. You have succeeded. The specter's shoulders trembled in surprise. He immediately raised his head to look up at the night sky. It was currently late at night, the sun having set already. The bright night was lit up by the countless stars and radiant moon. Floating high in the middle of the night sky, Sienna glared down at the specter. After all, you have definitely managed to make me angry.